Are we up and running? Thank you. Thank you. Let's get that door closed. Socrates made the point that the first thing you need to do is define your terms. Because a lot of times people talk. If you ever watch children play, 2, 3 years old, children play, they don't really play with each other per se. They play in the same vicinity as one another. So you'll have a sandbox, you'll have a couple of 2-year-olds in there, and just developmentally they haven't gotten to a place where they can legitimately play and share. And so sometimes it looks like they're sharing, but wait 5 minutes and you'll see them display a lack of impulse control and narcissistic behavior. In a lot of ways, a lot of the negative personality disorders and traits that we find in adults, they exist naturally in children who just haven't learned delayed gratification and executive function and impulse control. So you get like really small children, they'll, everything is about them. And as you grow up, you learn to value other people as well and value their perspective. Like I said, in a lot of ways, it's the line of demarcation between children and adults. Even if you look, you're freaking me out. It's okay. Thank you. If you look, I got too many cameras on me already, and just the mechanical one and the sound, it's just too much for me. Thank you. If you look at children when you're young, children actually think you can see what they see. And then around the age of 3 or 4, they realize that you don't see through their eyes. There's a whole separation when children learn to view themselves as discrete entities. Prior to that phase, if they look in a box and they see something in the box, they assume you see it also, because they haven't fully viewed themselves as separate individuals. This takes place 2, 3, 4. That's the age where this takes place. Anyway, there's an experiment they do, child psychologists do, to figure out when children have a discrete enough sense of self, and it's their ability to deceive. You'll play a game, and the child will look into a box that you can't see in, and then they'll lie to you. Oh, there's something in the box when there's not, or there's nothing in the box where there is, and it's a game. It's a fun game. The thing is, although it's a fun game, it's the beginning of learning to deceive people, and that you can lie to people, and it starts out as fun, but you all know what lying's about, right? You've all been lied to, right? More importantly, you are all expert liars, isn't it? You an expert liar? Yes, you are. You may be in recovery. But if you say you don't have a black belt in lying, guess what you just did? That's right. So anyway, the beginning of our ability to lie to people is at this stage when we realize they don't see what we see. And it sounds really cute and fun when you look at kids playing the game. It's cute. But like I said, it turns into us manipulating people and exploiting situations and so many things. Could you close that door, Sheree? Thank you. My mind is not so powerful, and so I need like a certain amount of a lack of distraction to link my ideas together. I wish I was that Zen teacher who there could be a train wreck going on and I would just, like a river flowing, just verses would be coming, but it just doesn't work like that for me. I got to think through the stuff I'm trying to say. So yeah, once kids develop a discrete sense of self, they start to get really about fairness. And so you'll find around the age of 6 or 7, kids get into having clubs, making rules. You got to follow the rules. My son famously, Shekar, my 18-year-old, famously said, like more than a decade ago, he said to one of his friends, he goes, "Hey, if you want to have a friend, you need to be a friend." So we like still to this day tease him about that because it's a great one-liner, isn't it? He was like 7 when he said it. And like I said, that's the age where you become really concerned about fairness. Anyway, around the age of 12 or 13, you get to a place where you start to do things for people irrespective of them paying you back equally. And that's the beginning of really like adult level friendships amongst kids. We develop that ability just to do stuff for people because we care about them without keeping rigorous track of exactly what's happening. So, I got blown away. I kind of like I wasn't able to. I got to like be on point to master my tangents, so I get to bring it back. I mean, I kind of know roughly what I was talking about. I was talking about impulse control and executive function and delayed gratification and how these are lines of demarcation between children and adults. And when a child behaves very selfishly, takes something from you, slaps you, that's just like we control them. But when it happens with an adult, they get labeled as having some sort of personality disorder because they just behave impulsively based on their desire without being able to think through things and discern what's appropriate in a given circumstance. Anyway, along with that impulse control, there's actually a development of the way we think. I outlined a little bit of that. I forget the super brilliant point I was going to make with it all because, like I said, I'm not that smart. But yeah. Well, where I was headed was that along with our ability to control our impulses is our ability to appreciate other people's perspective and appreciate other people's points of view and their experience. And that's also something that you grow into as you grow up. And so Socrates says the first thing you have to do is define terms. And there's a real value in this because if you don't bother defining your terms, it could be that you're like a 2-year-old playing in a sandbox with another 2-year-old. You're in 2 totally different worlds. Their toy you think belongs to you. You become disturbed when they want to play with that toy. You think the whole thing is yours. You don't think it belongs to them. They have the same mistaken conception. And because you guys have a different understanding of what's actually going on, it ends up resulting in a bunch of discord. And so please come sit here. Yeah, come, Ishwar. And so you got to define your terms, otherwise you end up in a conversation with somebody and you're using the word love to mean one thing, and they're using the word love in an entirely different way. You're using the word fair in one way, and they're using the word fair in an entirely different way. You're using the word steal or deceit or honesty in one way, and they have a different understanding of what that term means vis-a-vis that circumstance, and that ends up being a real problem for people. So if you take the trouble at the outset to define your terms, you end up having much better dialogue. And even when you're looking at something like mental illness, such a difficult to define thing. Where does one mental illness stop and where does the other start? What's the difference between histrionic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder? Is there actually something called Asperger's, or is it just high-functioning autism? When you look at things like the DSM, which is the book every 5 or so years that they write where they list all the different mental illnesses, the terms change over the decades. What used to be diagnosed, being homosexual was a mental disorder up until 1973. It was listed in the DSM. They took it out. Asperger's existed up until just a few years ago when they decided Asperger's wasn't its own thing and you just had autism. And so even when it comes to something very, very complex like dealing with mental illness, mental health, there's a value in sitting down and trying as rigorously as possible to define things so that when you're talking about something, you and the other person know what you're talking about. Do you guys follow that? Even with positive terms. Positive psychology did this as well. They took the trouble to define a lot of positive terms. Somehow our pathology-based approach to mental health got us really good at focusing on what's wrong with people. But then somebody came along and decided, why don't we study what's right with people? And that was the birth of positive psychology and studying high-functioning people. Finding what makes people happy. Defining what is happiness. Rigorously defining what happiness is. What compassion is. What forgiveness is. What kindness is. And so philosophers have been doing this forever. And over the last 100 or so years, psychology has done the same thing. First with negative emotions and then with positive ones. And there's a value in that. So I wanted to today define some key terms that all of you know, but we'll look at how well you actually know them. So if I had more time, I would probably question you guys, and I think there'd be some value in that. And we'd go back and forth. But just think it through. What does pity mean? When you say you feel pity for someone, what does it mean? You don't have to answer. Just think about it. What does it mean to pity somebody? Is it condescending? When you say you pity somebody, is it condescending? Some of you are nodding your head. Some of you are doing the poker face. We're not playing poker. If I say if I say it, you guys can give me the no or the yes or the I don't know. But the goal isn't to freeze and look at me and it's we're not playing poker. Just in case you guys haven't figured that one out, I'm letting you know. You get no points for vexing me, confusing me, making me unsure what you're thinking. You do get points for letting me know what you're thinking, because then I can sculpt the class for you. Pity is often used with a negative connotation, isn't it? You all speak English. You know this. It doesn't have that denotation, though. It doesn't actually mean something condescending. It means to feel bad that someone's suffering. It's actually linked to the word piety and pious. That's where it comes from. And so it's a good positive emotion. You see somebody suffering, you feel bad for them. What pity is not linked to is doing anything about it. Pity is fairly limited in terms of it motivating you to act. It's just the feeling. I see somebody suffering and I feel a little bad for them. Then you got sympathy. What's sympathy mean? And how is it different than empathy? You want to? Yeah, I was rhetorical, but for sure, please.
Empathy and sympathy differ.
You gotta be just a little louder for me.
I think empathy is sitting with the person, and sympathy is seeing yourself outside of their situation.
That's a very valuable contrast. I don't know if it's the whole definition, but it's certainly congruent with the definition, and it's quite insightful. So thank you. That's good. The word empathy is only 100 years old, maybe like 115 years old. And so it means to feel. Pathos means to feel. We use pathos and we think like pathetic and pathology, but the word pathos means feeling. So sympathy means to feel with somebody. Empathy means to feel into somebody. So empathy usually means to put on somebody's shoes and walk a mile in their shoes. But sometimes a con man could be empathetic with you to figure out how you tick to then, or a con woman, to figure out how you tick, and then they could use that to exploit you. So there's cognitive empathy, and then there's emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is when you feel the other person's feeling and you genuinely feel pain in your heart for the other person's difficult circumstance. Sympathy, you feel with them, you want to help them, but because sympathy has some distance between you and the person, and you haven't done the work of actually walking a mile in their shoes and really getting into character, so to speak, then you might not know what they need. And so you might make a random act of kindness for them or try to mitigate their suffering and just get it wrong and make it even worse. Like you see a bug and they're struggling, and you're like, oh, I'll help this poor bug out. And then you go and rip its legs off by accident as you try to pick it up with a piece of paper, and you just made his whole situation infinitely worse. So, there's a guy named Rabbi Twersky. He just passed away a couple of years ago. He was a straight up rabbinic scholar, an actual rabbi. Black hat, all white hair, monster white beard, black suit. I don't think he was Hasidic, I think he was Orthodox, but whatever. He looked like a Hasidic Jew. And he was also had a PhD in psychology, specializing in addiction and depression. And worked as a psychiatrist as well as psychiatry, and worked as a psychiatrist as well as a rabbi. Far out character. Anyway, towards the end of his life, he started putting out these cool little 2-minute YouTube videos, basically like a precursor to Reels and TikTok videos, with him talking about super deep subjects. Were you guys listening on your way here?
Yeah.
Cool. I do repeat stuff for pregnant people. So if they hadn't heard, I would have done a little recap. You want to share?
I'll sit on the bench.
You sure? All right. He, you know, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Judaism and Orthodox Judaism and their usage of parables to teach life lessons, but it's a whole thing. And he tells this great story about a rabbi, and he had his assistant, his acolyte, his apprentice. And so the apprentice was helping his elder, and they went into the elder's office, the rabbi's office at the synagogue, and people came in all day long, and he sat there and listened to them, and they gave them advice, and they left. And like around, halfway through the day, the rabbi was sweating profusely. And the apprentice said to him, "What's going on? Are you sick?" He said, "No, I'm exhausted. I'm really working." He goes, "What? We're in an air-conditioned office. You're listening to people. You dole out advice occasionally." And the rabbi said, "People come in and they tell me their problem. And I have to take my clothes off and put their clothes on so I understand their problem. And if I just understand their problem, then I can't help them. So I have to take their clothes off and put my clothes back on so I can give them advice. And I've taken off my clothes and put them back on 30 times today already, and I'm exhausted." Sometimes you get therapists, I don't know how familiar you guys are with therapy, but sometimes you get therapists and you tell them your problems and they just sit and listen to you all day and give you no advice. You ever had experiences like that? And maybe if you have no friends and you just want a sounding board, then that can be of value. But usually at some point, people want some advice, and that becomes quite limited. And, they sort of keep themselves in there shielded from having to be vulnerable. People don't realize this, but giving advice also creates vulnerability. You have to put some skin in the game. Most people don't like doing that. Most people become therapists don't like doing that. That's why they became therapists, so they could shrink you and psychoanalyze you at a safe length without putting any skin in the game and pretend like they're being your friend. Do you guys follow that? A little critique of the failings of modern therapy and specifically of modern therapists. But to really advise somebody, you have to both separate yourself from them so that you can give them advice, so you can shrink their problem, and you have to get in the mix, put some skin in the game, and make yourself vulnerable. Otherwise, how are you going to encourage anybody else to be vulnerable? If you want to sit in your ivory tower, how are you going to get anybody else to come out of the shell? Do you guys follow this? Empathy and sympathy are part of the game, but compassion is king or queen. Compassion, the word passion is an English word which means suffering. It came about in the medieval period, and it was related to Christ suffering on the cross and dying for other people. The word passion specifically denotes in the English language, originally, Christ suffering on the cross. That's how the term entered into English. Compassion means suffering with somebody. Compassion is oftentimes thought of as being the best of sympathy because you want to help, mixed with the best of empathy because you know what the person needs. You look confused. Did you space out for a second?
No, I lost that train of thought.
So you spaced out for a second. I wasn't talking fast. Yeah, you just lost your train of thought. Yeah, you spaced out a little bit. Let me say it again. See, if you show me that confused look, I do repeats. And he's not even pregnant, and I'll do the repeats for him. Compassion is oftentimes thought of as the best of sympathy, a desire to help, mixed with the best of empathy. You've sat in the person's world enough that you know what to do to help them. The words sympathy and compassion are almost structurally the same word. Sim means with, com means with. Pathos means feeling, passion means suffering, also feeling. So pity, you feel sad when you see somebody suffering. Sympathy, you want to help them, but you might not know what to do. Empathy, you take the time to figure out what makes them tick, but you might not do anything with it. Compassion, you feel for them and with them, and you want to help them, and you do something about it. Anyway, compassion is a whole other thing. There's familial compassion and societal compassion, universal compassion, and there's altruistic compassion. There's a whole bunch of different things you can do with compassion as well. And like I said, positive psychology did a great favor to the world. They started to think about these positive terms, not just the negative ones, and they tried to define them rigorously so we could have an intelligent conversation about it. So, now that we've all got the same dictionary, and we've taken the trouble to get on the same page with the meaning of words, and we aren't just playing in the same sandbox, but we're actually sharing toys and making eye contact and discussing something where you guys, at least you know how I use the terms, how the terms are standardly defined. There are other definitions. I gave you the mainstream definitions of these terms. There are always people who make it their business to try to define the terms in funky ways because they think it's cool. But what I gave you was the mainstream of how these terms are understood these days. If you look terms up in the dictionary, you look at a Wikipedia entry, you read something, in a journal, this is the way the terms are used. Now that we've gotten that glossary of terms, I want to look at a verse in the Gita that I think is powerful. Alpam yena sarvatra. Alpam yena sarvatra samam pashyati sarjuna. One who sees sama, equally, sarvatra, everywhere, alpam yena, in comparison to your own self. Alpamya is the two Sanskrit verbal roots. The prefix upa, which has many meanings, but in this context it means near. And then the verbal root ma, which also has a lot of meanings. Ma means mother. It means don't. But it also is a verbal root that is the beginning of many verbs in Sanskrit. And one of the primary ones is to measure. So by measuring close to yourself, by comparing to yourself and looking at somebody else and thinking, how would I feel? By putting yourself close to them. You guys follow this? By measuring, by putting yourself next to them or feeling into them. Alpam yena sarvatra. By looking at everything as if it was happening to you. Sapashyati. You see the world like that. Sama. You see the same everywhere because you think about how would I feel if that was done to me. Sukham va yadi va dukam. Whether it's someone's happiness or their sadness. Duk means sadness. Sukh means happiness. Ka means whole. Sukha and dukha is the actual word. It gets shortened to sukh and duk. Ka means whole. In Sanskrit it means sky, but originally it meant whole. And sukh was a good hole, and duk was a bad hole. And so if you had a chariot and your wheel had a good hole in it, then you had a smooth ride. Had a bad hole in it, it made for a bumpy ride. The Vedic peoples used chariots and horses, and so that's where the word happy and sad comes from, etymologically. So you guys follow that? Sukham va yadi dukam va. Whether you're happy or sad. And I think this is interesting because, like I said, psychology for 100 years studied what was wrong with people. It was a pathology-based psychology. Just in the last 20 years, 25 years, they've really been studying what's right with people. I mean, it's gone on for longer than that, but that's when it really took off. And positive psychology started getting taught at colleges. Largely sponsored by big corporations. Big corporations want you happy. You know why? Because you get sick less. You take less days off from work, and you're more productive. That's why they give you free food and soft drinks and stuff. Google makes everybody work harder and be more productive. Take less days off. You want to comment on this?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
She's manages 300 people at a Fortune 50 company. He's in the military. You have a comment on this?
They give me a lot of free coffee and drinks at SpaceX, so.
Right?
I was like, oh wow.
He's in the military and he works at SpaceX. How cool is that? He's a captain in the military and he works at SpaceX. It's like he's a lawyer and a doctor. He's a ballerina and an astronaut. He's like everything. Yeah. Insurance companies are all about this stuff too, because you get sick less, you take drugs less, and then you spend less of their money, and you pay the insurance, but you don't cash in on the insurance, and so it makes it easier. Everybody wants you to be happy, fulfilled, learn forgiveness, learn compassion. It's one of the biggest sponsors of positive psychology all around the world for its academic study and research and development is big business, because it makes sense financially. I think it's interesting that, Krishna speaking here, had the good sense to realize that empathy, getting close to somebody, see how it has that same feeling as empathy, feeling into somebody, getting close to somebody, whereas sympathy is just kind of, there's a little bit more distance. But aupamya means getting close to somebody. The upa means you get near to them. And so I think it's interesting that Krishna uses both positive and negative states of being, and you should empathize with people in both. We usually think of empathy and sympathy as being when somebody's suffering. Compassion literally means when somebody's suffering. You suffer with them. But these terms also, you can sympathize with somebody and empathize with them when they're having a wonderful day and feel their joy with them. And experience positive states of being as well. I thought it was particularly piercing that Krishna had that understanding. Sayogi paramam mataha. Sayogi paramo mataha. I consider such a yogi to be the highest. Sayogi. The person who's a yogi like that. Paramo mataha. Mata means I consider him to be Parama, supreme. So as Krishna's talking about self-realization and liberation, like a sure sign or a symptom of somebody who's really advanced is their ability to empathize with and sympathize with, put some skin in the game, really get into it, really create some vulnerability, because immediately when we're born in this world, the first thing that we are aware of is our own self. As we develop as children, the first thing that happens is you start to develop a sense of yourself as being distinct, usually from your mother, your attachment figure. At a young age, 2 or 3, you get separation anxiety. When you're separated from them for too long, you start to develop a sense of who you are. That develops to where you realize, actually, my mom's not in my mind hearing what I think at all times. And you start to see yourself as a discrete entity. And then you have your vision of the world, your eyes and ears and nose, your ability to consume data and think about things. And then as you grow up, you stop from doing that, which is sort of a solipsistic or narcissistic world where you're the center of the world, and you begin to realize there's other people in the world who also have feelings. But how do I know what you feel? The only way to know what you feel. You want to go again? Sure. That one was decidedly rhetorical. The other one, maybe I paused too long. That one was totally part of a statement. But you raised your hand. You did so good last time. I want to hear what you say. I want to hear what you have to say. I appreciate that. I don't know how you would determine that with small children, that they're crying out of empathy. It could just be that the whole situation freaked them out, and so they cry because it spun them out. Like, my daughter regularly assaults me. She'll take like a heavy object and drop it on my face while I'm trying to sleep. And then I'll be hurt, and then she'll cry and make me comfort her. And so this idea that I have 6 children. And they've all done this to me. I have scars from all of my children doing what by any legal standard would be considered to be assault. And aggravated assault because they were using a weapon, you know? Whatever. You have to prove mens rea, you have to prove criminal intent, so they didn't have that because they were lacking moral agency. So I'm being facetious, but functionally, my children have all assaulted me with weapons at various points. And it's this universal thing where I'm hurt and I'm like, and they start crying and spazzing out. And I have to stop being hurt and comfort them. It's okay, baby. Look, it's okay. It's okay. Daddy's just bleeding. It's okay. There's no problem. So I don't know how you would determine that children have natural empathy. I don't know how you would say that that's intrinsic or inborn. And it's, naturally manifest without any learning that takes place on their part. That's totally intrinsic, like the way a bird will naturally just kind of fly out of the nest at some point, or animals copulate and have sex without having any training whatsoever. It would be hard, in my mind, it'd be hard to examine children and come to a sure solution there. And my whole angle is not that. So even if I could figure out a way to support that idea of intrinsic compassion, activate it all on its own as an instinctual emotion that requires absolutely no training, that's like an instinct, and no modeling, it just happens automatically. I don't want to support you on that because it goes counter to the point I'm trying to make in class. So maybe there is some validity to it, but I'm going to hate on it anyway, just because I want to make a different point in class right now, and so it's totally antagonistic to what I'm saying, but I appreciate it nonetheless. I do appreciate it, and I'm glad I called on you, if only that it gave us a little bit of comic relief. I think as children grow up, they realize my mother is not me. We are not one and the same. I have my own mind. I have my own thoughts. And then we live in this sort of narcissistic world, but then you grow up a little bit and you realize, wait a second, I want to be fair to you and I want you to be fair to me. And then eventually you realize, I want to be good to you even sometimes if you're not so good to me. I want to be there for you even in your difficult times, and I'm going to stop keeping track because I'm an adult and I'm actually capable of a full-fledged friendship and like actual love in its most, in its more evolved, more adult state, and its more adult iteration. And where it's not just what's in it for me. What have you done for me lately? It's not just that anymore. There's a song, What Have You Done For Me Lately, when I was growing up. Janet Jackson. You guys know that song? Might have been Paula Abdul. I think it was Janet Jackson. It was Paula? What have you done for me lately? You right? You old enough to know that song? Dun, 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 ooh, yeah. Forgive me, I'm sorry. I'm feeling a bit irreverent. So, I actually see an evolution that without having your own personal experience, you're not able to feel empathy, because empathy is a growth from my own private conscious experience of reality to extending that to somebody else. And the richness of my own experience of life gives me deeper and deeper levels I can empathize with other people on because I've been through similar things. You seem confused? I'll repeat myself again. Maybe you're just squinting because of the sun, I don't know, but it's over there. I can squint, you can't. I can't figure it out. But imagine empathizing with someone who's blind. Would that be difficult to do? Not at all. Just close your eyes and imagine walking through life with your eyes closed. Take a shower with your eyes closed. Try to cook yourself dinner with your eyes closed. Try to get in your car with your eyes closed. Don't try to drive with your eyes closed, but you get the point, right? How about a person who is blind empathizing with somebody who could see? Is that possible? It's not, because philosophically there's things called that are ostensive. You must see them to know them. If you want to teach somebody colors, the only way to teach somebody colors is you point to the color and you go, that's red, that's green, that's blue. If you don't have the ability to see, there's no way to know. How would you describe red? It's hot. Like you think, oh, you're sweating? I don't get it, right? Blue is cool. Like, what does that mean? Color is ostensibly understood philosophically. You actually have to point to it to understand it. Imagine trying to communicate lust to a child, a prepubescent child. Anybody post-pubescent, and you can describe lust, and they can immediately know what you're talking about. Why? Because it's a biological phenomenon that takes place at puberty. You guys following this? It's one of the reasons why usually people who've been addicted to something are the best people to counsel addicts, because they can really empathize. You follow? So my argument today is that empathy depends on having had your own experience. Just like the child, that's really valuable. To see things from your perspective, to understand how you feel, to get in touch with your emotions. And empathy is when you graduate from that and you're able to now extend that to somebody else and recognize similar symptoms in them and really listen, and you can compare it to what you went through and get close to them because you've had that experience yourself. And so the birthplace of empathy is comparing to yourself, and Krishna's usage of the term alpamyena, by comparing to yourself, is incredibly philosophically astute, because it gets to the core of ideas like empathy and compassion, which are rooted in having had an experience yourself and then using that to reach out and touch somebody else who's going through that and to begin to feel what they're going through. Did that make sense, Ryan? You're my litmus test. You're like a piece of litmus over there. I don't even know what that means. But I think litmus is some kind of paper or something like that you then... Did you guys follow this? So now we bring it all the way around. We're not quite done yet. We're almost done. We talked about children. Selfish, narcissistic little children. Selfishly running around, thinking the whole world's about them. I mean, I've literally had my children pass stool without a diaper on. Now I have to clean up a bunch of feces. Then I pick them up to get them out of the stool, and they vomit on me. Now I'm covered in vomit and feces. And then they cry. And I have to comfort them. You know what I mean? I have to comfort them. Like children, I mean, just imagine just the gall on these kids. It's like, I pass stool, clean me. I'm not satisfied with the way you clean me, I'm going to cry. Now you have to caress me, put me back to sleep, carry me around until I fall asleep. If I wake up again, I'm like, how tired do you have to carry me around again? And I'm hungry, I'm just going to cry. And you have to figure out what I want. I'm never going to tell you what I want. You have to figure it out. All you get is me screaming at you bloody murder until you figure out what I want. These children learn to feel and to think and to express. And then as you grow up, you start to think about other people besides yourself. And that's the essence of compassion, empathy, sympathy, pity, all those wonderful emotions. And so all of those are included in this definition of you have to compare things to yourself. Whether someone's happy or sad, think, how would I feel if I was in a similar circumstance? Amazing thing about this is it doesn't require you to be super zen. Whatever level you're at, whatever level of realization you're at, if you can sincerely think about somebody else's circumstance as if you were going through it, you can feel compassion and empathy. Maybe, you get sick and you have to boldly at some point, we all have to give up everything, including our own body. Every one of us is going to have to renounce our own body at some point. It's called death. And move on. People are like, oh my God, I can't believe you renounced that. Hey, we're all going to have to become full renunciates at some point in the not too distant future. But maybe somebody gets real sick, and you're super lame when you get sick. You're not stoic at all. But then when somebody else gets sick, you're like, I can empathize with you. I feel bad for you. I can forgive any little weird stuff you do because I'm like way worse. You follow? It doesn't actually require you to be on a super high level. You just have to have enough experience and then be bold and compassionate to be vulnerable and extend that courtesy to somebody else and put some skin in the game and get in there with them, and that's the birthplace of empathy. It's all based on having had experience yourself and then gifting that to somebody else and being willing to realize they're like me. They're just like me. Did you guys follow that? And so Krishna mentions this as being the defining feature of an advanced yogi. This is why sometimes I critique therapists for not putting skin in the game. There is some professional distance that has to be there in order to be able to help somebody see through their problem, like with this Rabbi Twersky. But there also has to be some getting in there in the mud with somebody and feeling what they're going through. That's also a critical feature in order to really know what they're going through and really be able to help them. And a lot of times you need to share what you've been through. It's one of the reasons I don't want to be a therapist. I like being a priest because I can share with people my own personal experience shamelessly and vulnerably. And I usually find that's what helps people the best, instead of staying at arm's length and just naming their emotion. Oh, it seems like you feel like this. It seems like you feel like that. You follow this? And so we see here that the greatest yogi gets into it with you, whether you're happy or you're sad, with your joy and your sorrow, the whole world. So you look at animals, you realize they have C neuron fibers like we do, and nociceptors like we do. They probably feel pain just like I do. They certainly seem to respond to violence the same way I do. They cower from it. They try to get away from it. You should probably stop eating animals unnecessarily. I shouldn't abuse people. I shouldn't lie. I shouldn't be deceitful because I don't like it when people do it to me. In a lot of ways, this stuff is in the golden rule, the categorical imperative, to treat others as you want to be treated. It's the same basic principle. It's one of the reasons why it's such an enduring idea that comes up over the millennium from different philosophers. Anyway, part 2. Stay with me here, everybody. Part 2 is just a little later in the text. And this one I'm going to ask you a question. So see if you can follow this. Just a little later in the text, Krishna says, Te sham eva anukampartam. Te sham, for them, for those people who serve me. Satata yukta, they're yoga to me always. Bhajatam pratipurvakam, with love and devotion. To those people who've opened that door. Te sham, for them, because they've opened the door. Evanukampartam, for the purpose of being compassionate. Anukampa is the Sanskrit word for compassion. Anu means for another, and kampa means quivering, shaking. When you shake for another, when you quiver for another person, when it's happening to them, like sometimes they say about empathy, empathy is your pain in my heart. You know, sometimes people go, I'm an empath. That term comes from a 1956 sci-fi novel. And it was popularized in a 1968 episode of Star Trek called The Empath. And that's when the term found its way into modern usage. And weirdly, people who describe themselves as being empaths usually say it to mean, I'm so empathic and empathetic that anything you share with me, it will affect me so heavily. So do not share with me. It's so cheesy. It's the opposite of empathy. In the name of being an empath, people become incredibly callous towards others. And they use it to explain why they really can't take your garbage because they feel it way too much. I'm always doubtful whether they actually feel it way too much or whether they just don't care. But anyway, only they find it inconvenient to realize there's other people inhabiting this planet besides themselves. Tesham, for them, for those people who've opened the door. Evanukam partam, out of shaking for them. Aham agyana jam tamaham nashayami. I destroy the darkness of ignorance that's in their hearts. Te sham evanukam partam aham agyana jam tamaha. The darkness, tamaha, born of ignorance, agyana ja. You guys should be able to follow this. Gyan means knowledge. Agyan means ignorance. Agyana ja, born of ignorance. Ja means janma, means birth. Tamaha, the darkness born of ignorance. Nashayami, I destroy that. Atmabhavasta, situated in your own heart. I who am in your heart with you. I personally, Nashayami is the first person present tense singular. Krishna literally says, I destroy that. In a sentence. I destroy that. Darkness of ignorance in your heart, because I'm also in your heart. Out of compassion for you, I destroy that. Jnana dipena bhashvata, with the shining lamp of knowledge. Why did I just quote that verse? I destroy the darkness of ignorance in your heart because I'm also in your heart. And I do it with the shining lamp of knowledge, and I do it out of compassion for you. Because you've opened the door. Why did I just quote that verse? That was the question. And that one's non-rhetorical. And I want some confidence out of you, young man. You feel confident?
Two answers.
I don't want two answers. I want one. You've already anticipated failure. Because you're coming with Arnold Schwarzenegger, not that he's somebody to be quoted, but he said, don't come up with a plan B. Don't come up with a plan B, because it means you're already planning to fail with your plan A. Come up with plan A and make it work. There's also Cortez. You guys know Cortez? Burn the boats. You guys know that one? It's not true, but anyway, when Cortez landed to exploit the indigenous people of South and Latin America, he famously told his warriors to burn the ships. Because if they burned the ships and then marched into the jungle, what couldn't they do? They couldn't retreat. And so they had no choice but to conquer the locals, steal all their gold, which they did successfully. That's why everybody's Catholic in South America and Latin America, because the Catholic Spaniards came and colonized the whole country, like the whole continent. Don't give me a plan B. Burn that ship.
I'll go with the one that...
Go with the...
Okay, so I was thinking, it's really hard for me to be empathetic. So how is it that someone can, in one lifetime, have all that experience to be able to empathize at that level where they're ready for liberation? Because Paramo Yoga, right?
I got you.
So my answer for that was, okay, Krishna saying, I destroy the ignorance and so you become empathetic. That's the answer. That was my second answer. It might not be...
So you did give me two answers.
No.
That's just one?
Yeah, that's one.
I'm not very impressed. I'm not, and I don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to bother critiquing it, but I know you love me and have faith in me, so trust me, I don't agree with your answer. Plus, it's my reason, so, like, I've set it up in such a way where you got to come up with my answer. It's an okay answer. We can't empathize with people enough, so Krishna destroys our ignorance, but somehow that translates to gives us the ability to empathize with others, although I don't really know that that's necessarily synonymous. Seems like there's a little jump in there, but it's okay. You're smart, and what you said was smart. Yeah. Scream at me, so I don't have to repeat what you say.
I think you quoted it because Krishna is the highest yogi, and you said that the verse before said, the compassion manifests those who are compassionate.
Oh, that's cool. I wasn't thinking of that, but that's a good one. The highest yogi, and Krishna's the highest yogi, and therefore he has the most compassion. All right, that works. Still not what I thought of. I think mine is better, but I liked yours. I super like yours. What do you got?
He's in everyone's heart as a super soul, so he knows everyone's heart's best. So if he's directing you on how to empathize with the other person, he's connecting with himself and the super soul.
That's a good one too. Krishna says in the previous verse, Dadami buddhi yogam, I give you intelligence. And so there is this idea that our conscience is our God-given intelligence, and our conscience, we're connected with divinity, and that divinity can guide us, maybe through circumstances where we can't guide ourselves. I like that. Like I like your thing. I kind of love your guys', both your answers equally. More? No more bites from the apple. What do you got, Ryan?
Not much, Prabhu.
All right. All right. I got a whopping 4.5 minutes left, so here we go. Listen up, everybody. Here we go. The whole class was for this. Okay? Krishna is also capable of being compassionate. Our ability to be compassionate is because our source is also compassionate. In this sense, it is intrinsic. It is inborn. It is our nature. As souls, our nature is to be compassionate. Why? Because our parents are compassionate. Krishna is both our father and mother. Krishna says in the Gita, Pitaham asya jagata mata. I'm the father and mother of the world. Mahat yoni, the world is my womb. Garbham dadhamyaham, and I give the seed. Krishna claims both the male and female roles in the birthing of this world. And so our parents are the original compassionate people. Therefore, it's our nature to be compassionate. As we become compassionate, we become more like Krishna. Krishna's vulnerable too. We think sometimes that being invulnerable and being aloof is the best thing. But Krishna here, the Supreme Lord, is saying that his heart quakes for us. It shakes for us. It quivers for us. That means that there's a positive sense in which you can be relative, in which you can be affected by others, in which you can allow others into your heart. And Krishna is superlative in that regard and unlimited in that regard. And so we find that the course of self-realization recommended in the Gita, where we learn to empathize with others by comparing them to ourselves and using our consciousness to allow us to kind of extend our awareness to include other people and realize that just because somebody has a different color skin or they're a different sex, they're from a different part of the world, speak a different language, have different mores, that those people have. And this is there in Kennedy. We all breathe the same air, we all drink the same water, we all want to care for our children. This is a time where we thought Russians were essentially devil spawn. In 61 I think it was, in the U.S., and just the absolute middle of the Red Scare and the Cold War, Kennedy gave this famous speech saying that we all live on the same, because they were worried about thermonuclear destruction, the whole world getting killed, destroyed forever. And so he said, we all breathe the same air, drink the same water, want to see our kids grow up and have a better life. When you see people manifesting empathy and the ability to put themselves into somebody else's shoes through their own experience of life, it's a beautiful thing, it's a powerful thing. And Krishna is the most empathetic, the most loving. His omniscience and omnipotence allows him to be compassionate to a superlative degree. We're limited. We can only do so much to manifest our compassion. We can only identify with people so much. But an omnipotent, omniscient being, if they were compassionate, then we call that mercy. We call that grace. We call that divine grace. And so even ideas like grace and divine grace and mercy are linked to compassion, which is linked to individual consciousness, which is linked to being a person and extrapolating. And in some ways you could say that grace is the growth of God. As you become gracious, you become more lovely and wonderful, even if you're unlimited to begin with. And so even though the soul may be perfect to begin with, we can still grow unlimitedly. Even though the absolute supreme source of everything might be unlimited to begin with, that doesn't mean it's static. And so what you have here are like radical ideas about growth in transcendence, the growth of divinity, the growth of the soul. And the reason I included both verses was because both verses glorify and speak of compassion. And in that sense, we're becoming Krishna conscious. Conscious like Krishna is conscious. We're starting to see the world, jnana chakshus, through the eyes of knowledge. Shastra chakshus, through the eyes of our tradition. And so being Krishna conscious means being conscious of Krishna, thinking about God in all circumstances, thinking about the highest principles in all circumstances. But it also means learning to look at other people the same way God does, as all children of the divine, to love everybody, to feel other sadness as being your own, not in a way which is degenerative, but which in a way which is uplifting and which brings out the best in people. And so I put these two verses together because they largely describe the exact same phenomenon, but the like presto thing for me was, wow, this is how Krishna feels, and we also have the ability to touch this and experience this, like sparks have the same capacity as fire, like sunshine in a minute degree has the same capacity as the sun. He gave me a little trucker. Oh, you talked about this today? Cha-ching. There it is. Drop the mic now. Let's do a little kirtan. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.